I'm gonna go ahead and start it. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Okay, we're going to call to order the special meeting of the San Diego Water District, November 8th, 2023, 4 p.m. May we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Board Member Blackwell,
Here.
Board Member Ehlers.
Here.
Board Member Hensy.
Here.
Vice President Kranz is here. And President Lyons. The
Here.
record will show that all members of the Water District are present, and pursuant to Resolution 8907, they do receive an independent stipend of $100 for convening the Water District meeting.
All right, well, this being a special meeting, then we'll go into our special meeting agenda item. And this is item number 1, presentation of financial plan and briefing on budget-based tiered rates for the San Diego Water District's water rate cost of service study. And our finance manager, Kazunga Gu, will present this item.
Thank you, President Lyons and members of the board. You'll have to excuse me, I have a cold, so I'm trying to keep my coworkers safe. The district aims to perform a study every 2 to 3 years to ensure that its water rates are sufficient to meet the revenue requirements in order to fund the operating and capital costs of the water enterprise. The district's last 3-year rate study was completed in September of 2021, and the resulting adjustments were approved by the board on September 22nd. On August 16th of this year, board members authorized staff to enter into an agreement with Raftelis Financial Consultants to perform the next water rate study for the district. The 3 biggest issues facing the district currently are the loss of local water from Lake Hodges, which happens to be the district's cheapest source of water. Due to the SDWD restriction on Lake Hodges, local water to the district has gone from nearly 2,000 acre-feet per year to only about 500 acre-feet. The result of this is a tremendous increase in water purchases paid to the CWA, as the district must replace this cheap source of water with the more expensive raw water.
No PowerPoint?
For these couple of, for the first introduction of that is.
Yeah, it's coming. The second issue facing the district is that with the anticipated loss of local water, there's also the anticipated cost to repair and replace the dam. Replacement estimates run in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the district is contractually obligated to pay its share. A third issue is the aging infrastructure that the district has. Most of the infrastructure was built in the 50s and has an estimated life of about 75 years. It is now reaching the end of its useful life and must be replaced. And then finally, in anticipation of SB 606 and AB 1668, the state will be setting budget-based volumetric water objectives for water suppliers starting in 2025. So staff requested RFC, or Raftelis Financial Consultants, to provide an overview of budget-based tier rates, which will take into consideration water efficiency targets that are set by the state for indoor and outdoor water use. Due to the intensity of the budget-based tier rates, as well as the software and infrastructure needed for them, they will not be included in the current ongoing cost of service study, but staff wanted the board members to be provided with an overview of these rates. I will now turn it over to Steve Gagnon of Raftelis Financial Consultants to discuss the district's financial plan and budget-based tier rates.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, directors. My name is Steve Gagnon. I'm with a firm called Raftelis. We're a national firm of about 160 consultants, and most of our work involves helping water and wastewater utilities develop financial plans and set rates. I've been consulting for about 25 years, and for 15 of those 25, I've been helping water and wastewater agencies set rates in Southern California, mostly from LA down to San Diego. So I've been working with your staff, and today we're going to present to you the results of the financial plan that we've been working on, and then there's an informational presentation having to do with budget-based tiered rates. So there are 4 steps in a rate study. We are currently on step 2, which is the financial plan. This means we're about halfway through. So the financial plan establishes how much money do you need in a year to run your utility. Once we know that, we move on to what's known as a cost of service and rate design, where we design rates to collect the amount of revenue we identified in step 2. And then we do the Prop 218 requirements to implement those rates, which includes a report, a Prop 218 notice, and a public hearing. This slide just talks a little bit about Prop 218. I think I'll just paraphrase it. It basically says that rates need to be based on your costs. It says that water revenue needs to stay in the water fund. It says that your rates need to be proportional to the cost to serve the parcel. And then lastly, number 5 here says that you need to send out a Prop 218 notice, wait 45 days, and then have a public hearing. The last one, number 6 at the bottom here, is fairly new. Don't know exactly when it came out, but it's been within the last year or two, where this particular section of code here says that there's a 120-day limitation for somebody to challenge your rates. And if you put that on your Prop 218, then you have this 120-day limitation. This next slide talks about a few pieces of legislation that have to do with rate setting. And again, I'll paraphrase these. It's been a while since I read them, but essentially they're there and they say they prohibit water waste. And the second bullet there, Water Code Chapter 3.4, incentivizes rate structures that conserve water. And I would say that you have that because you have a tiered rate structure. This is a rate structure that incentivizes water use, decreased water use. And then the last bullet point here, Executive Order B3716, is what Mary was talking about. The state is going to set budgets for each water purveyor. And this was supposed to have happened in June of 22, but I was on the website today. It looks like it's going to happen sometime in 2024. And each water purveyor is going to self-calculate a budget based on population and outdoor irrigable area, whether or not you sell recycled water. You get a credit for that, if you will, and a couple of other things, and then you'll report to the state. And I'll get more into that a little bit later because I've noticed in my travels that some people think that this is requiring agencies to establish budget-based tiered rates. That is not the case. This is not a requirement to establish budget-based tiered rates. Okay, so let's talk about the financial plan. So what is a financial plan? It simply compares your revenue and expenses, and if your revenue is not sufficient, we propose revenue adjustments so that you can meet your expenses. Now, your expenses include wholesale water purchase costs, operation and maintenance costs, capital costs, debt service payment, and reserves. And so later in this presentation, we're going to put in front of you revenue increases, if you will, and that is a result of comparing your revenue with your expenses. The next few slides, remember I said that there were 4 steps, so I'm kind of going sequentially through step 1, 2, and 3. This next step 2 is kind of in the details, if you will, and I'm just going to give you the bigger takeaway is that when we set rates, we follow a process. It's called the cost of service process. I just want you to know that we follow this process. Rates are not arbitrary, and I've got a couple of slides about how we do that. So the first thing we do is we take all your costs and we put them into these different cost centers. You can call them cost components, call them cost buckets. And you can see that each cost center has has to do with the type of cost. You got the supply cost has to do with getting water. Delivery has to do with your transmission and distribution system. Conservation are your conservation costs. There's this extra capacity component which has to do with delivering water on, say, a hot summer day when everyone's using more water in August than, say, in the middle of winter. Your tanks have to be bigger to meet that water demand. So that's known as extra capacity. Then there's maintaining meters, and there's answering calls from your customers and billing them and reading their meters. So you can see there's a bunch of buckets here, and we put them into these cost centers. And then we distribute those costs to your customer classes. So this slide simply defines each of those buckets that I went through, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. It just regurgitates what I just said about the different buckets. I've highlighted peaking costs. That has to do with, again, the cost of upsizing your tanks and your pipes to deliver water on a max day. Because water doesn't flow the same amount every day. It flows more in the summer, it flows more at different times of the day, and so on. So those are called either peaking costs or extra capacity costs. And this slide simply shows two different systems. You can see the blue system has on average, let's say 900 acre feet per year, and then the red system is a system that during the winter doesn't have much use, and then something happens in the summer where the use essentially quadruples. One would argue that that system needs to be designed to accommodate that type of water use. So this would be an example of extra capacity or peaking costs. And then what we do, just to finish up this step 3 here, is so now we have all your costs into these buckets, and usually on the left here, there you see a square. Usually those 4 buckets are recovered through a volumetric rate. That means dollars per 100 cubic feet, right? And then the 2 cost buckets on the right-hand side are usually recovered from a fixed charge by meter size, which is what you have right now. Now, the bucket where it says extra capacity, you can put some of that cost into the fixed charge and some of it into the volumetric rate, so there's a bit of leeway there, but I just wanted to give you the background on where usually these costs end up, in either the fixed charge or the volumetric rate. And by the way, you can stop me at any time, or I can take questions at the end if you have questions, or just let me know. Okay, so now we're getting into the financial plan, and this slide just gives you a little bit of background before we get into your financial plan. It's just a way of saying that across the nation, in this graph here, you've got 2 bottom lines which show the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is the darker blue line there, for a number of years. And you can see what's happened lately in the last few years with inflation. But what a lot of people don't know is the top dark green line. There's actually an inflation index by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. They track this. And they track water, wastewater, and trash in a CPI index. And you can see it's the top line. And so across the country, what this says is that water and wastewater prices, and trash too, are going up a lot faster than your regular day-to-day goods, right? Milk, bread, iPhones, all that stuff. Water and wastewater services are far outpacing other things. So that just gives you a little bit of background. And the general consensus here, some people ask, well, why is that? The general thought on the street is, if you will, is that as a country, we've invested in a bunch of buried infrastructure that only lasts so long. Pipes, right? Usually 75 to 100 years or so. And it's coming due, right? A lot of this country was built after World War II. And it's coming due, and it's costly. And so that's why this outstrips your regular day-to-day goods. And then this graph just shows you inflation, what has happened, right? We've had 20 years of benign inflation from about 2000 to 2020, and then this happened. And this is for San Diego. And this affects your costs, of course, your chlorine, your materials, everything. So when we do a financial plan, something that we have to consider is how much water are you going to sell? And of course, the more you sell, the more revenue you get. If you don't sell as much, you don't get as much revenue. And last year, it rained a lot. So I have a lot of clients who have lost a lot of revenue. I was trying to think I'd come up with some numbers. I know Seal Beach, for example, had about an 18%, 17% decrease in water sales. So that was about a $600,000 or so decrease for them. So we've assumed for your financial plan, you would sell 5,300 acre feet of water. Now you can see the blue line is how much you sell since fiscal year 2016. Sometimes it's 5,000, sometimes it's 5,800. On average, it's 5,400. But we assumed 5,300. I think that's a good idea because you're being a little bit conservative from the average, right? Because we don't want to overestimate because your rate is a cost divided by water sales. And if you don't sell that much that you planned you were going to sell, you're going to be short in revenue. So it's better to be a little conservative. So your average is 54, we assumed 53, okay? And this also affects your financial plan. This shows you the water sources from, you buy water, imported water, and then you get Lake Hodges water. And I understand that there's a concern over the dam, and you're not going to get all the water that you thought you were going to get. On average, you get about 2,000 acre feet. And I guess in 2023, you got about 1,000 acre feet. And in the future, it's uncertain, and we're assuming 500 acre feet from Lake Hodges. Another thing that affects your financial plan is what your wholesale water purveyors are going to charge you. And this chart shows how much their rates have gone up over the past 3 years, from 21 to 24. It's gone up a little more from 21 to 24 than if you were to look over, say, the last 10 years or so, right? It's gone up more in the last few years. So what we're assuming here is that the last 3 years is going to be, how shall I say, more predictive of the next 3 years. So what we're assuming here is that your wholesale water purveyors are going to continue to increase the charges they charge you by the percentages shown in this table. And it's really just history, right? This is the last 3 years, and we're saying this is what's going to happen for the next 3 years. I think it's a good place to start, unless anyone else has a better crystal ball. You have a lot of capital projects planned. They're listed here. I think the average is 6.5 or so million. Your financial plan has to cover these capital projects. Yeah, if you exclude 24, which is a little low, then the average over the next 5 years is 6.5 million. Something that people sometimes forget is you also have to plan for reserves when you do a financial plan. It's good financial practice to have reserves, an operating reserve, a capital reserve, so you can execute contracts. And this slide shows the different reserves that you have: an operating reserve, vehicle, capital reserve, and then a rate stabilization reserve. And they amount to something in the high teens, 16, 17 or so million dollars. And you'll see that in a slide that I'll show you in a second, but you have to set rates to plan for these reserves. So this slide shows your current financial condition. And on the left, I've taken fiscal year 24, and it simply shows the money in, the top line total revenue of 22 million. Then you got money out, expenses of 19 million. Then you have to pay for debt service. So you're actually in the black, so to speak, before you do any capital. But you haven't done any capital. So then you're planning to do $2.5 million worth of capital, which leaves you in the red at the end of the year. Now that's one fiscal year. If you look at the graph on the right, remember this graph that this slide that I just showed you right here, you see how 2.5 million for 2024, your capital is planned to go up more in the out years. So that's why when I go back to this graph, you see the red bars at the underneath the the zero axis, if you will. That means you're bleeding each year if you were to do nothing, not adjust your rates. Now, of course, you would probably cut back on capital because you can't bleed this much, so you'd have to cut projects. But if you didn't cut projects, we project that you would bleed by the amount shown in this graph. So that's why, I guess this is the crux of the presentation here, so that's why we are proposing revenue increases. as shown in the top graph here, of 15% each year. Let's talk about the lower graph. So remember I was talking about reserves. On this graph, you see a dotted blue line. That is the operating reserve goal. And as far as my clients are concerned, all my clients hit that goal. And we're setting rates. You can see that your reserve balances, which are the bars, are above that line. So that's good. But then you have those other reserves that we just looked at in another slide. You got the capital reserve, the rate stabilization reserve, and then a little bit for the vehicle reserve. So that green line is the addition of your operating reserve plus your capital reserve. And then finally, that yellow line is your operating reserve, capital reserve, your vehicle reserve, and the rate stabilization reserve all added into one. So what I'm getting at here is even with these 15% revenue increases, and with the projected expenses that we have, if it is, at the end of the day, it's a model, right? We project that you would, of course, hit your operating reserve, but you would get close, but you wouldn't quite hit your operating and capital reserve. Because that's somewhere around 15, and we project that you would be around 12 million. Now, there's another point that I should have put in this slide. We assumed for the first 2 years that you would only execute 75% of your capital projects. So I'm coming back to this slide right here. And for the first 2 fiscal years, you see the 2.5 and the 7.3, or actually, let me just check something. I want to make sure those 2 years are correct. I think it might be the two years after. Okay, it's 25 and 26, okay, so not 24. So for 25 and 26, we assumed that, you see how it's 7.2 million and then 6 million? In reality, a lot of my clients don't always spend what they say they're going to spend because things just don't happen perfectly, right? Things are late, you lose some staff members, yada, yada. It's called the planning fallacy. And so we assumed that you would only execute 75% of the numbers you see in this table. So that is reflected in this financial plan here. So in other words, you're not doing, let's go back to 2025, you're not doing 7.3 million, you're doing 75% of that. And it's just to reflect that, you know, things run behind schedule. I think that's all I wanted to say on this slide. Before I move forward, I thought it might be a good time to maybe pause a little bit and see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for that information. Of course, being that you're presenting here for the first time, there's a lot to take in. So I don't see anyone queued up to speak, but maybe they will be soon. Vice President Kranz.
Yes, appreciate the presentation. That last bit first, if you factor in that 25% that the planning fallacy accounts for, you make that up somewhere, right? So are you saying that 25% in terms of the rate structure allows us to raise the rates less so that, because we don't have to, but eventually you have to catch up, right? Because you're going to do that 25% at some point, I think, right? Well,
I mean, if in theory, I guess you could say that you're always a little bit behind, but if you don't want to, if you want to plan for a scenario where you're doing everything you said you're doing, then that 15% needs to be something like 16 or 17%.
I see. And this is a phenomenon, this 25% is something that you see throughout all sorts of agencies, yes.
Yeah, it's even a little more than that, actually.
There's a public sector joke in there somewhere, but
Well, it's not just the public sector. I mean, how
Oh,
many
boy.
times have you said to yourself, gee, it took me longer than I thought to do such and such?
if I only did 75% of the work I do during the day, I would not have a job very long, right? So, but meanwhile, back to the other question that I had, which is that you identify meter maintenance, but as we know from experience over the last couple of years, some of the asbestos pipes are not waiting for us to do, to contract to replace them, they're breaking. So is that meter maintenance number all-inclusive of what we historically have in terms of emergency repairs?
Maybe you could go back to slide 19 on that.
Actually, if you look at this table, under the third from the bottom, it says asbestos pipe replacement. As you know, we are currently in the process of doing condition assessment of all our AC pipe in the system, and we were expecting that we will finish this process by next year and then start planning replacement program for the district over the years to come.
Right, but there's a zero for 24. Are we just going to assume that asbestos pipe isn't going to break?
No, because this is not for repairs, this is for CIP. The repairs comes under the water infrastructure and improvement, which is on number 5. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, but if you look on the 5th bullet from top, it says water infrastructure improvements. We have $730,000 that we have allocated for that, just in case.
So what's the meter maintenance?
The meter maintenance is, as you recall, we are
Exercising the meters or replacing the meters?
replacing meters and replacing the dead endpoints that we have on our meters. We have had an issue with the meters, and also we are in the process of actually preparing an RFP for us to go out for AMI for the meters, and that will require, obviously, replacing the meters in order to the new technology.
I'm
So
just
that's
a little surprised we don't expand, or we don't have a bucket for emergency repairs, or, because we know that the emergency repairs are varied and, could be any number of things. And maybe what we should be doing is, not calling it meter maintenance, we should be calling it meter maintenance and emergencies or whatever. But what you're saying is that your rates include emergency repair monies.
Yes.
In this table right here under capital projects.
One
When
of
it
the
seems like it maybe should be O&M, right?
Yeah, it's under O&M, and there's additional monies that are under O&M. It's not listed in this table. This just shows how much more money we're requesting from a capital perspective. There's, yeah.
Okay, I was pretty certain that you probably had everything covered, but I just needed to kind of be clear and make sure it was on the record. Thank you.
Yes, Board Member Ehlers.
Yeah, can you go back to I think you had an inflation chart in there that showed the hump. There you go. So you made a comment that the price increases of the last 3 years will be the same for the next 3 years. This seems to say something different because we experienced a huge inflation trend. Now, I agree inflation will be up, but why do you say that this 3 years is going to repeat and we're going to have another peak at 8%?
Well, I think when I said the last 3 years will repeat, it was in regards to your wholesale water purveyors.
So one component, not all the other costs.
Right.
So, and can you, what percentage of our overall operating expenses is that? Is that 25%, 50%?
I don't know if you know that, ma'am.
The water purchases are slightly under 60%.
60%?
Yes, it's the biggest component of our budget.
Okay. And when you say that the water rate will be, is that 8% per year, or is that 8% we're showing on the slide we're looking at right now, 8.5% from 21 to 24? So is that roughly 3.5% or 3% per year, a little under?
I guess I'm not sure I understand the question, but maybe this will answer it, is alls we're saying here is that in the future, right, you purchase water from the San Diego County Water Authority. We're saying that whatever, they charge you a raw water rate, and they charge you a treatment rate, and all these things in this chart, they charge you all of this.
Yeah.
And we're simply saying that next year, in for 2025 and 26 and 27, well, at least for the next year, we're saying they're going to charge you 8.5% more for that particular component next year.
And is that 8.5% additional per year? So 3 times 8.5, or is it 8.5 over the 3-year span from 2021 to 24, and therefore 25 to 28, or 27, sorry.
Let me check.
Yeah, because that's a big swing.
I think if I remember correctly from being a board member on the San Diego County Water Authority, that's per year. It's that amount per year, and I think this averages out to somewhere a little bit over 9%.
Okay, it looks like we're ramping down a little bit. So I have, for the next 2 years, that's, for most components, we have this for the next 2 years, and then it ramps down to what you could say is more traditional increases. Do you know what I mean? So the last 3 years have been very inflationary, resulting in this. So we're starting with this for a couple of years, then we ramp down.
Okay. And can we talk about, I understand the inflationary pressures, and we see the curve on that where it is ramping down, maybe sooner than what you're predicting. But let's talk about what drives the other increase in these costs. Is it, and I always view water as a capital expense, that if you cut the amount of water usage in half and save water, you still got the same debt service. You have the same capital improvement. You got the same, So in other words, if you lower the denominator by half, you double the resulting rate you calculate, right? Is that the prime driver here? Is it water savings and less water flowing through the plant for an individual ratepayer that is driving this, 8%, 9% per year average increase in raw water rate?
Well, it's a little bit difficult for me to pontificate about what is driving a very large water agency's increases, but I will say that, Mary and I were talking about this the other day, that more people are sourcing water from local sources, whether it be the ocean, RO, or more wells. And so one of the things that has gone up is the infrastructure access charge, and they're increasing their fixed charges so that they can be less dependent on water sales.
Okay.
Which is the case for you too. Unfortunately, a lot of water purveyors, like you said, when water use goes down, most of your costs remain. And so the math of a water rate is simply cost divided by a denominator, which is volume of water sales. And like you said, if that denominator goes down, then your rate goes up. So you're in the same boat as San Diego County Water Authority.
Okay, so that's a good explanation that the other water sources come in and they reduce the amount that we're buying, reduce the amount that the wholesaler is selling, and therefore their rates per unit go up.
Yes.
Because, their capital costs. Okay, great, thank you. I got a better idea of the dynamics of the different cost increases going on here. The second question I have is the comment about only using 75% of CIP, and I would argue that private does the same thing. So, I've seen that happen in private business too. Historically, how much each year, the last 3 years, let's say, how much of the CIP that we planned did we actually spend? Is that in line? So, do we have the numbers for the last 3 years or so?
Well, to answer that question, unfortunately, we did not have any CIP projects in the past 3 years. There hasn't been any CIP projects in this district for quite some time. I think the last CIP project we had was in 2014 or 15, and that's one of the concerns that we have regarding our infrastructure. Most of our infrastructure was built, or 40% of our pipelines were built in the 60s. That's why we moved and the board authorized that condition assessment in order for us to be able to look at the health of our pipelines, for lack of better word.
Okay.
So
we can either look at that we spent
Yeah,
all of our capital, which was none, or none of our capital, which was none. Okay.
yeah, but based on the master plan of 2022, we started designing of 6 projects that were recommended as part of that master plan. We currently have 1 in construction. We are going to be coming on November 15th for another construction project to be awarded by the board. And we're hoping that for the next 3 years, until we get the condition assessment and start replacement program for the asbestos, we will at least get those done. That was critical projects that were identified in the master plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other speakers. I'll jump in, and then if anyone else would like to get in the queue, certainly do. I have a few questions that are kind of more locally focused as far as what I would like to get feedback on whether maybe you can think of it in a large picture way, but whether we're running this year at a loss as far as revenue. Can you give me a gut on that, or?
I would say based on the current numbers that we've been running for the last few weeks, our revenues are on target.
They are.
As you know, when we adopted the budget, we had decided to use a 3-year average because some of the years were pretty skewed. So we are pretty much on target. And I think also what has helped was the governor lifting the drought ordinance. And so people are using a little bit more water than they were when the drought ordinance was in place.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. To me, it's a bit of a touchstone. Where are we at right now? And I know, because of all the rain we've had, it would be likely that maybe our revenue is down. But it doesn't sound like it is.
I just want to add to that, if you recall, when we did the budget for this year, we had to use our reserve funds for stabilization reserve fund in order to cover some of the expenses that we have.
And that was going to be my next question.
I'm sorry.
But absolutely. Can you refresh our memories, just for the benefit of everyone here, about that reserve fund and how much is depleted? And then I'd also like to understand what's a healthy reserve amount.
When we adopted the budget, we were having to dip into the reserve to the tune of almost $900,000 to make sure that all our expenses were covered. And then I think your direction at that time was to try and replenish that reserve as quickly as possible, and that's why we're doing this rate study now so that we can work on replenishing that. I also have to put a little disclaimer in the sense that the year-end numbers have not completely come in for FY 22-23, and as soon as those come, I expect that we will see an improvement on the reserve target. So it might not be as bad as we had originally anticipated.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All the things combined, we've had to use some of our reserve. We have additional costs associated with our local water not being available. We have additional potential costs associated with the repairs to Hodges, which is separate than the cost of water. I'm a little surprised, but I'm not surprised, I guess. How these all total up is a little hard to take, I think. But we've got a combination of factors that have come together right at this time to impact the costs that we have to bear. So I guess I have some other questions, but I'm not sure you answered my question about what is a healthy reserve amount, but I'm imagining it's what our reserve target is to replenish the reserve.
Exactly.
Yeah, so.
I was going to say on the slide that shows is currently on the board right now, our rate stabilization fund was set by this board at 15% of annual water revenue. So at any given time, we strive to have that 15% of annual water revenue.
Okay. So I'm going to ask probably a naive question, but it's kind of in my head, it's money in, money out. And, that's how you balance it. So we're talking about rate increases. We're talking about money in. Are there any other, I know we're not talking about what our rate increases are now. We're only talking about our financial plan right now. But when we're talking about revenue, money coming in, are there any other ways to bring money in? Maybe it's temporary, maybe there's a federal source. We've got some compounding issues occurring here in our water district. This is kind of outside the box, but maybe you could shed some light on it?
And there's no doubt in my mind that we will be looking at grants in order for us to be able to implement our CIP program in the future. But at this time, it's really hard to figure out which grants we'll be applying for because we really don't have any projects or a start of a project like a 5% or 10% design for us to be able to apply for those other than the one just I mentioned, which is the AMI project that we're hoping that we could be able to apply for grants in order for us to be able to implement that project. Just that project by itself is about $8 to $10 million, obviously over several years.
Yes, so it's probably, I'm going to guess what you'll say here. You're probably going to say, we can't count on anything like that. We can't even count on estimating we might get some money from another source just because we don't have it secured. Is that correct?
That is correct. At least for the next 3 years, for which is this budget cycle that we're preparing, or the rate study that we're doing for the next 3 years. We don't anticipate that we will be getting any monies in from grants other than the AMI. And that's why if you look at the AMI, which is $8 million, we did not include that total amount in there. We try to be conservative because obviously this is something that we will have to be able to maneuver over several years, which is quite a chunk of money when we talk about $8 million.
Would it be realistic for us to carry things on our capital improvement plan that are, say, maybe a couple years out that we don't plan to get the money to afford yet? I mean, because we're aiming at 15%, I think you're saying, and that would be to execute our whole capital improvement program?
And we have taken that into consideration. When you look at, can you show me one of the things that we included in here, for example, for asbestos replacement, the capital, yes. Yeah, so if you look for example, on the asbestos pipe replacement, we have added $1 million per year for the next 3 years, so that when we have the first project, we will be able to have monies in order to accommodate that, so that we will start saving from now towards that. Usually a replacement of 1 mile of pipe, it's about $1.5 to $2.5 million, depending on the location and what it impacts. And then if you look at our system, we have 168 miles of pipe. So even if we replace 1 mile a year beginning 2027, that will take us another 168 years in order for us to replace each and every mile. So we thought that we start throwing money in there so that we do not get caught into not being able to start our program the first couple of years, but then we need to figure out how best to address that, and maybe that's when we start applying for grants so that we can replace more pipelines within our district.
One more thing, and then I see we've got some others in the queue. I think what might be helpful for us to do is give you feedback as to where we see there's opportunities to adjust, and then to ask you to come back and give us what your assessment of the numbers then would look like. For me, I see this list of capital projects here on slide 19, and I would hope that maybe we could go down them and you could tell us what that means. You've already done that a little bit based on Vice President Cran's question, but from the words you're using here, I'm not absolutely sure what's included in each of these, so maybe we could get to that.
I can go through them to the best of my abilities, and then I will ask Habib to jump in if he has anything that I'm not saying right. So the first one, SCADA, it's a $20,000 that we use each and every year in order for us to upgrade our SCADA system and ensure it's up and running. The transmission line maintenance, this is the project that we are currently coming to award this year, which is replacement of all the air release and blow-offs on our transmission main, and there is going to be one this year. We already have the money for this year, but for next year, there's phase 2 of that. On the joint facilities, this is something that we and Santa Fe Irrigation District work on in order to get the CIP program for the next 10 years. And if you recall, back when we did the budget, because of the loss of local water, a lot of that has been moved and delayed. So we just need to make sure that we have enough monies to the projects that are in place. Joint facility capital acquisition, this is part of the Santa Fe Irrigation District cost. The water infrastructure improvements, this is the one that I was mentioning that we have 6 projects in place in design. Some of that money is going to be used for the project that we're going to advertised next year. On the meter replacement, we used to have $100,000. We increased that replacement of meters to $450,000. And the reason behind that is most of our infrastructure was for the meters were installed in 2005, 6, and 7. So all of them are reaching their useful life in a quick fashion. And accordingly, we need to replace more of them. There's a lot of dead end points that we will have to replace, and that's what's causing our staff to go actually to the meter to read it, because there's no, we cannot read it electronically. And on the water study, obviously, this year is the $100,000. On the Lake Hodges repair, we started doing $500,000 a year in order for us to save for the replacement of the dam, which is going to happen in 6-7 years. And just to give you an idea, that's about $30 million. Our share would be, assuming that it's going to be a $300 million project, which is anticipated. We started also including the urban management plan, which happens every 5 years. And then that's where we started in 2025, adding $1 million to the budget for asbestos pipe replacement, which we were just talking about, and the condition assessment we're doing. And then this system condition assessment is what the board has approved or in the process? It's going to be approving on November 15th, assuming, and that's about $330,000 over 2 years. And the last on-call consultant is what the board has approved back in September to hire a consultant on board in order for him to help us with all these CIP projects that are currently in place.
Thank you.
I tried my best to get it as quick as possible. If there's any other
That was
questions,
perfect. That was perfect. Thank you. Vice President Kranz.
Yes, I appreciate that. I would, the reality is that these jumps in rates are going to be quite unpopular. And in the interest of transparency and the need to be able to explain what's driving it, I need to see that particular spreadsheet with, sub items on it that details, what is in each category. And I'm assuming that the numbers that populate those cells are all based upon engineering estimates or some sort, or maybe for pipe, it's per foot. We know that it costs this much. I'm assuming you're adding in, adjusting those numbers for inflation year over year, et cetera, et cetera. And so, while I appreciate that we don't want all that detail right here, I do want to know that we have that detail backup for the public so that we can fully justify what it is that we're doing. The other issue that I wanted to talk a little bit about, you put that chart up there for rate stabilization. And I'm wondering, in the percentage increase that we're talking about for the rates, what does that 15% annual water revenue represent in terms of a percentage of the percentage rate increase? So in other words, is it 0.2%? Is it 1%? What is it? And how do we see the use of that coming into effect? Because as I see those numbers grow, just for the sake of maintaining a rate stabilization reserve, we are adding a certain percentage to our rate increase. And maybe at this point, since rates are going through the roof, we don't want to be trying to build a stabilization reserve quite that big. And, the other thing is if we are going to, I think it's important that we have some detail about when that would kick in. And I know in the past we've used it when water sales have gone down and we see that our revenue is dropping below, and so we dip into the rate stabilization so that we don't have to go back to the ratepayers for an increase. I get all that, but I hope that we can kind of game that out a little bit to see, are we in the right place in terms of how much of the percentage increase that we are talking about. And then finally, the other question that I have is related to the compounding of these rate increases and what that real rate increase, what that means in those out couple of years, So because it's going to be painful. So, thank you.
Board Member Hinsey.
Thank you. I think that was a really good suggestion by Vice President Krantz about maybe dialing back our increase in the stabilization reserve while we refocus on some of these capital projects. My question is, in your studies of working with other water districts, are you seeing this type of high rate, double-digit rate increase across similar districts to
I've
ours?
actually got a slide on that
Oh, good.
in 2 slides.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, my idea for raising revenue is that we sell the merchandise that our children, winners of our water-wise contests, produce with those tote bags, because I would pay a pretty penny for one of those.
Very good. Board Member Ehlers.
Well, great. You anticipated one of my questions, and I'll wait for the 2 slides about other water authorities. I would also support what Vice President Krantz asked for with wanting to see the detailed spreadsheet. I agree. I need that kind of information to support this. And I agree that the rate stabilization shouldn't be a rate destabilization charge. So we should use it to stabilize these increases. So that was it.
Okay, seeing no other questions now, we'll go ahead and jump back into the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so we ended here, and the team thought it would be good to show you a scenario. This is if you get 500 acre-feet of water from Lake Hodges. We thought it might be useful to show you a scenario where what if you don't get any water from Lake Hodges? Then you have to buy more imported water, which would reduce your reserve balances. So I'm going to go back to this is 500 acre-feet of Lake Hodges water, and the study ends in fiscal year 27, so that's why I've got a circle around it, right? We're setting rates for 25, fiscal year 25, 26, and 27. So if you just look at fiscal year 27, and starting soon, you didn't get any Lake Hodges water, then you can roughly say that you would end up there instead, because now your water purchase costs have gone up instead of getting free water. So I guess this is just an informational item. We just wanted to show you what if there's no Lake Hodges. Just a word about bill impacts. We've shown you revenue increases. That's the overall revenue increase, but it is not the exact same as customer bill impacts. They're usually close, but we're going to do something called a cost of service study, which is sort of splitting up the bill, and the bill depends on how much water you ordered. So that 15% will be a little less if you use less water. It'll be more if you use more water. So it doesn't exactly equate to customer bill impacts, but it's, in the ballpark. Okay, so here's that slide. We just did a data dump, if you will, of a lot of agencies that we're working with. And this is showing you a handful of other agencies that are implementing rates right now. They're sorted from high at the top to low at the bottom, and I think I'll just give you a second to look at it. I will say that I've done not all of these. Some of my colleagues have done these, and I will say that I feel like the ones near the bottom are a little older, like they were started sooner. And the ones near the top are fresh, so to speak. We're working on Seal Beach right now. We're working on Huntington Beach right now. We're working on St. Helena. So those are fresh. They just seem to be a little higher than the ones at the bottom that are a little older. So the average is 15, just happens to be conveniently what we're proposing today. But, this needs to be taken with a grain of salt because each agency is different. Some agencies are old. Some agencies have elevational pumping charges, more electricity. Some agencies may not invest as much as you and may not have may not want to keep their system in pristine shape. And some agencies get a lot of property tax revenue and other agencies don't. So all of that affects your bill. And some agencies maybe have not changed their rates for years. So, for example, I think there's one on here. I guess it's not on here, but it was 100% increase. But they haven't done anything for years. So you got to take this with a grain of salt, So just thought I'd mention that. So that's the first half of the presentation.
Can you go back?
Go back?
I just want to mention again that we are different than these agencies in the fact that we have the local water source that we have been using for years in the past is no longer there, which amounts to about at least 1/3 of our demand. So just that, in addition to everything else that has been mentioned in here, that other agencies are going through, we have this additional part that adds to the cost that we are going through. I just want to make sure that.
Okay, thank you, Isam. At this moment, we have a few people in the queue. Should we break for a few more questions? Well, you're the next one. We'll go ahead and break for a few questions right here again then. Vice President Kranz.
Thank you. A couple other questions came to mind. I saw the results of the election, special election that just was held, and it looks like the folks up in Rainbow and Fallbrook, surprisingly, 90% voted to get the heck out of CWA. The legislation that would require a countywide vote didn't get signed in an emergency fashion, so it looks like they're going away. And do we have any idea how that's going to affect the 13% or whatever it was from the County Water Authority? Is that factored in here at all, or is that a whole different thing that we're going to have to wait to see how CWA responds to all that?
I can take a shot at it, and then, basically, yes, we would have to wait what CWA is going to be doing. In my understanding, the first few years, Fallbrook and Rainbow will be paying some monies to CWA. I don't really know if it covers all the costs that they have been going through, but there might be some impact to us. But at this point in time, we cannot factor it in just because we don't really know what that would and how it will impact us. I don't really know if President Lyons has
Right,
additional information.
all I'll add to that is it has been a moving target, so we do have a board meeting tomorrow where we have the opportunity to get some updates.
And is litigation being considered? Can you answer that question?
Yes, it is. I can answer it that way.
Yes. And the answer also is then, at some point, there may be some sort of adjustments to the rate structure at CWA as a result of that vote. Yes.
Yes, I would agree with
Which
that.
would scramble everything that we're doing right here.
That's probably a good point.
Is that correct?
mean, in
Maybe?
theory.
Yeah,
It could. I
sorta,
mean, it all depends
kinda.
what comes out of it. But I mean, it all depends how much they are going to be contributing in the next few years, and it's going to make a big chunk of money and big impacts to the CWA or not. So at this point in time, it's really hard to predict that what it would be the case.
And there was some other water drama that, I don't know if drama is the right word, but it has to do with Padre Dam and the city of San Diego and how they are getting more recycled water, and therefore it may have an effect on rates at County Water Authority also. So there's quite a few moving targets when it comes to CWA.
I think it's fair to say that, yes.
Fair to say that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, these are interesting times.
Yep.
Board Member Ehlers.
Yeah, on this chart you've got up here, two water districts I would like to see on there would be Santa Fe Irrigation District, because they do have Hodges, almost identical situation to us, and I'd like to know what they're doing. And a Liebenheim Water District, because it's adjacent, does not have Hodges, but I'd be interested in the stuff, the propaganda I get from, since I'm a Liebenheim Water District customer, I get their regular newsletter, and they claim to be in the lowest half of charges. And when they plot out this very similar, what the actual rate charges are for, one scenario, Santa Gita Water District is always right there with them, down in the lower half. So I'm curious to see what they do versus what we're proposing here, and whether they're planning to have 15, 15, and 15 like that. After the last 3 years were, 5.5, 6, and 6.5. So that's a huge increase. Let's now talk about, can you go to the capital chart again one more time? On this, when you talk about the Lake Hodges replacement as an example, you said, in 5-6 years, that's not 30 million, but so I'm assuming at some point there's a bonding going on or some sort of borrowing that would finance our portion of the Lake Hodges replacement?
Okay, we're hoping, the first thing we're hoping is grants that we'll be giving to the state in order for us to build this. And then we're gonna be looking at the bonds to be sold if needed be. And then the $1 million that we're saving a year, maybe that will help us a little.
Okay.
But I mean, it's just planning ahead in that regard.
Oh, I totally appreciate the reserve like this, and I support it, and I think you picked a modest number, not, you're not trying to save all 30 million in 5, 6 years. Totally understand. So now let's talk about the 2022 Water Master Plan and the replacement. Does the current capital planning for the next 6 years, 3 years here, does that include a sufficient amount of capital reserve or future capital budget to meet what the 2022 plan said we needed to replace?
I'm gonna say yes to the best of our abilities, predicting what the inflation is gonna be. For example, one of the projects that we had this year, which we're gonna come in on November 15th for award, the engineer's estimate was 750, and I think we were at $1 million.
Wow.
So we came up at $1 million. So we revised those cost estimates for the other projects that are in the middle right now in order to make sure, to the best of our abilities, to accommodate that in there. But again, maybe things will change next year either way, but at this point in time, we're seeing that it is really hard to get construction companies actually to bid for projects. We had only 3 bidders on a $1 million project.
So when I go back and look at the master plan and I look at the projection, and it's a good plan, but obviously it's not what we have to do or what we're it's not set in stone. But it based its prediction based on 2021 numbers, right? So, and we all know what construction's done. It was predicting $490 million worth of pipe replacement to do all 168 miles, right? And so I don't see those kind of numbers here. So what that tells me is this is a modest plan to get ahead of, maybe not be as far behind as we were. If we were in fact not spending capital since 2014, that's a long time not doing these kind of investments. So we have some deferred maintenance we have to make up for, and that sounds like it's part of the reasoning here. But even at that, and if you agree, I'm not seeing the huge numbers that we probably would need if we were going to stick to the master plan 100%.
From the master plan, all the projects that are critical that had been defined as to be done immediately are the ones that are included in our thing. Not, there are some of them that had to do with fire flows or whatever have you, or increasing the size of a small piece of pipe. We try to avoid those at this point in time until the condition assessment is done. And as part of the condition assessment, if that pipeline needs to be replaced, we will upsize it in order to meet fire flows. So it's a moving target at this point in time from a perspective of what we can actually do on these capital improvement projects for the future.
Okay, but I think you hit it on the nose that this budget is just the critical projects identified in the master plan, not wholesale replacement of the pipes that we know are 70 years old and aging every decade more.
Yep.
And we'll try and get more life out of them as best we can. And I like the fact that it monitored the failure rates over the last, and I'd love to get an update on the failure rates too as you go forward through this budgeting cycle, because the trend has been up. I want to know if we're hitting any knees in the curve where it's really going up, so.
I can answer that. As a district, we have been really lucky. I mean, to be able to have only 1.2 main breaks per 100 miles is an amazing number. I mean, most agencies are in the 3 or more, so we're good.
Excellent, thank you.
Board Member Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. When we were looking at the benchmarking on slide 25 of the other cities, you had made a comment about the Lake Hodges effect. I'll just call it that, right?
Okay.
Do we know how much that represents in that 15% increase? That might be an unfair question right now on the spot, but do we have a sense of what it would be if we were getting adequate supply of water from Hodges?
I could calculate that. It'd probably take me a little bit, but I Offhand, I don't know, but it's something that I can calculate and get back to.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
but you can show the slide regarding 500 and 0.
Yeah.
It gives some kind of an indication. We don't really have
Yeah.
the numbers, but that slide that shows if we use 500 or not
Yeah.
might give an idea.
Yeah, you're right. So basically, remember, this slide was if you get 500 acre feet per year of Lake Hodges water. So your reserve balances are predicted to be 8, 10, and 12. And if that goes away, it drops to 7, 9, and 10. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's over 3 years, it's a $4 million increase at least in water purchase costs because you have to buy more imported water.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's an interesting number, thank you. Oh, there's no one else in the queue to speak, so would you continue, please?
Sure. So from what I understand from staff, this second part of the presentation is an informational item, and we'll be talking about rate structures, and we'll be having a discussion on budget-based tiered rates. So I'm going to go through what I've seen doing this for a while, the 4 main rate structures that are out there. So the first one is a uniform rate for all customers, not by class. And I'll be showing examples of each of these. So you can have a uniform rate for all your customers. You can have a uniform rate by customer class. In fact, I'd say this is there's a textbook that we use put out by the American Water Works Association. I would say this is probably the textbook rate structure where they start you off. Then you can have tiered rates, which is what you have right now, traditional tiered rates, where the tiers for single family are the same for everyone. Okay? And then finally, you can have budget-based tiered rates with custom tiers based on each lot size. And so here's a little bit of research that we did. We surveyed 325 agencies that report data to the state, and this is a breakdown of rate structures out there. You can see roughly 60% of agencies in California, of the ones we surveyed, have a traditional tiered rate structure. Then 35% have some form of a uniform rate that's either uniform for all customers or uniform by class. And then lastly, 6% of agencies have budget-based tiered rates. So I'll be talking about the volumetric rate, and just want you to know that all rate structures that I've come across, except for the city of LA, have a fixed charge by meter size. So that's in common for all of these that I'm going to show you here, as you see in the right table here, a fixed charge that goes up by meter size. So this one is the uniform rate, and it simply says that that volumetric rate for this example is no matter who you are, no matter what customer class, everybody pays $2, pays a rate. In this case, the example is $2.42 per 100 cubic feet of water. It's very simple. Some might say that if you have a uniform rate with a high fixed charge, it may not send as high of a conservation signal compared to tiered rates because you don't have that optics of, popping into another tier and paying more. Then there's a uniform rate by class. So the only difference between this and the last one is you can see there are now customer classes. So here, single family pays $242, multifamily pays a different rate, and so on. And you see how they're slightly different. The rates are usually reflective of the way they use water, and by that I mean their peaking characteristics. So multifamily and commercial usually have a fairly steady water use throughout the year. They don't peak, so to speak, so you can see their rate is a little less than, say, irrigation, which has that summer peak load to keep things green, and single family also has a similar load. So that's different rate by class. Then we have traditional tiered rates, and that's what you have now. And so on the right, those are your rates. You see you've got the different classes, you got the different tiers, and then the other classes at the bottom there, your commercial and institutional, those are a uniform rate, which is fairly common to do. So, like I said, this is very common, it's fairly simple, and the key here is that if you look at single family, you got the tier breakpoints there, 12, 20, and 40. That is the same for everyone, all single-family customers, no matter your lot size, no matter what. It's the same for everyone. And usually that tier 2 is set at a summer average. So you could say it's roughly the amount of water that the average house in the district would need to keep their lawn green in the summer. I think that's all I'll say there. And now we go on to budget-based tiered rates. So earlier I talked about Executive Order B3716, where each agency is going to report their water use and compared to a self-calculated water budget. I think in my travels, I've heard a few people refer to this, and some people seem to be thinking that, oh, because of this, the state is requiring budget-based tiered rates. There is nothing that I've seen anywhere that is requiring budget-based tiered rates. I just want to make that clear. There's no state mandate to do budget-based tiered rates. As far, I have not seen all the studies, but as far as the ones that I've seen, I can't say there is a peer-reviewed study that compares budget-based tiered rates to traditional tiers or other rate structures to conclude that they actually help reduce water use. In fact, one study, which I've noted at the bottom of this slide here, put out by the University of North Carolina, says that of all the rate structures that they looked at during the recent drought that ended in 2017 or 2018, there was no conclusive evidence that any particular rate structure helped to conserve water. So if you'd like to, there's the information if you wanted to look for that study. Agencies who have implemented budget-based tiered rates take a while to do so. A year. In fact, I just got an email from Moulton Nagel today. They said it took them a few years to implement budget-based rates. By the time they get the systems in place, they get the data in place, they educate the public, and so on, it's not a 2-month process. It's a long process. Okay. So let's define budget-based tiered rates. Budget-based tiered rates are tiered rates. The only difference is that the individual tiers are custom for each customer, and they're based on an indoor and outdoor water budget. Oftentimes, this is just for single family, but you could do it for all classes if you had the data. And so the key here is that Tier 2 adjusts based on each customer's irrigable area that they have. And when you hear this term called the total water budget, that is simply the addition of the indoor water budget and the outdoor water budget. That is known as the total water budget. So for the indoor water budget, there's 2 options. And from my research, I've seen that it's more common to assign an indoor water budget by assuming a certain number of people per home. It's usually 3 or 4. Of course, you don't have to do that. You could ask customers, how many people do you have in your home? And so usually the indoor water budget is, let's say, 47 gallons per person per day times 30 days per month, and that gives you the indoor water budget. And so normally, a lot of agencies, because they don't want to, take the time to ask how many people do you have in your home, and I think generally people don't like Big Brother asking how many people do you have in your home. They just assume a certain 3 or 4 people per home. But then, of course, we'll get into this because I've got a slide on the pros and cons, but then you have to deal with the variance requests. Then you're going to get calls. People are going to say, hey, I don't have 4 people in my home. My grandmother lives with me, and my uncle lives with me. I've got 6, or 7. So that would increase their indoor water budget. So you would normally have to have staff to take those calls and make those variance requests to adjust that indoor water budget. Okay, so that was the indoor water budget. Now let's talk about the outdoor water budget. Okay. Too many. Okay, so the outdoor water budget is calculated based on the irrigable area of each property in square feet, and this is a volume of water, right? So it's irrigable area in square feet multiplied by an evapotranspiration in square feet multiplied by an ETAF factor. So evapotranspiration is basically how much water is deemed needed to keep a reference plant, and that is usually some type of grass or turf. I don't know what kind. But in many cases, it's obtained from the nearest CMIS weather station. That's California Irrigation Management Information System. There's a website. And they have these weather stations all over the state. And you could use one of these weather stations to get the evapotranspiration data. The problem is the nearest one to you, I looked on their website today, is down in Torrey Pines. And it's very feasible that maybe the weather and so on, and it's very coastal. I know you're coastal too. But I read somewhere that most agencies have deemed that the CMIS, the state-operated CMIS weather stations, is not enough to reliably create a water budget, because in some areas they have microclimates, and it may be different, a couple miles inland than right near the coast. So I read that even though there are these CMIS weather stations, it's usually not enough, which means you now have to invest in some other way of getting evapotranspiration. And then lastly, this ETAF factor is just a factor to account for different type of plants and irrigation efficiencies. So in other words, they're saying, well, yeah, you need that much water for grass and turf, but you might have cactus in part of your lawn and you're going to have drip irrigation. So we're not going to give you everything that you need to keep, say, Kentucky bluegrass green here on the coast of California where it should be growing somewhere else. So that's the ETAF factor. I'm going to skip this slide. It's tier one. Indoor and outdoor is the total water budget. So something to take into consideration is that I'd like to define the difference between water efficiency and water conservation. In our office, we feel that budget-based tiered rates promote efficiency and not so much conservation. And the difference between efficiency is to use less water for the intended purpose. And that intended purpose would be to keep your area green. Whereas conservation is simply use less water. We don't really care how much or how you're going to do it, but just use less water. And that's because budget-based tiered rates establishes a reasonable amount of water use to keep an area green. So one could argue that if your goal is conservation, it might be better to stick with traditional tiers, where those tiers target more price-elastic discretionary water use in the upper tiers. Because I would argue that budget-based rates kind of provide a slightly different message. They say, well, okay, you need more water because you have a bigger lot. Well, here it is. Instead of saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't irrigate that second quarter acre that you have, or what have you. I think that's all I want to say on this slide. Again, the state is not mandating budget-based tiered rates. Okay. And so here we have a slide that goes into the pros and cons of budget-based tiered rates. So I already talked about, so one of the pros is, of course, people like greenery, and there's nothing wrong with having green areas. So the good thing is it provides a water budget for efficient irrigation. But there's also a lot of cons to it. So I already talked about the one in the upper left corner. Probably the biggest con is that it's complex to administer. You may need to upgrade your billing software to do the calcs, to do the water budget by lot. You have to get the irrigable area for each lot. And I understand you can get that from the state. The state did a flyover with an airplane, and they took photos of everybody's lot. I've heard through the grapevine that the data is not as accurate as one would like it to be, so there can be a lot of corrections. Because they try to do their best to say, that's a tree canopy, or that's grass, or, that's dirt, but it's, not being irrigated, and all this stuff, and it's just not as accurate as one would like it to be.
Steve?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if we could move a little bit more quickly
Faster?
through this.
Sure.
Well, and the only reason I'm saying that is a deep dive into this budget-based tiered rates may not be relevant to, unless, I don't want to shortcut other people, but maybe just keep it at a high level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think on this last box, I'll just say that the big thing here is that, at least in the initial stages, we hear from agencies that there's a lot of variance requests. Hey, you got my irrigable area wrong. Hey, I have more people than that. So you'd have to deal with that. And it's complex. You may have to update your billing data. You may have to hire more staff. That's that box. One lower box on the left, one might argue that it might distort water decisions because for a larger lot, it delays the point at which you enter into Tier 3 because you're getting more water use in Tier 2. Okay, because you have a larger lot, so you need more water. So on the right there, it's a long and costly process. We already went through that. Upper left here, some might argue that of those people that have xeriscaped their lot, put in cactus and drought-tolerant plants, they're not going to get the same budget as somebody with a lawn. So they might get, their budget will be penalized, okay? Maybe I'll just do two more. On the lower bottom of this table here, you may be aware that the California Public Utility Commission has asked the big three electric utilities to investigate income-based bills. And I don't know if that's going to gain traction or not, but I'll say that the water sector is keeping an eye on it, and there's already a paper on ways of billing for water that are not based on use, but based on other things. And that in that paper is, I put at the bottom of this slide here. The point here being is that lot size in that paper they found is usually correlated with the ability to pay. So if this gains traction, this ability to pay, I'd say that budget-based rates is counter to that movement, if you will, because generally larger lots have the ability to pay. I think I'll just move on there. And this slide shows which agencies we know of have budget-based rates. I'll say that Las Virgenes is up by Malibu, and there's a lot of stars there who want greenery. And these next two slides, I just want to make sure you understand budget-based tiered rates. Here we have two customers. And the blue customer, let's say, has 4 people per home, and they would get 10 units of water at $1. The red customer has, say, 6 people per home. They're going to get 12 units of water at that price, and so on. And the red customer has a bigger lot. So you can see that different amounts of volume, or the same amount of water use gets a different rate. And that's shown in this table here. I'll just go through one example. This is for El Toro. Look at 2,000 cubic feet of water. If a 1,000 square foot lot uses 20 HCF, their bill is $164. If a 5,000 square foot lot uses 20 HCF, their bill is $130. So same amount of use, but 2 different prices, okay? I think that's the crux of budget-based tiered rates, is it's your allotted water based on your need, okay? I think in the interest of time, I'll just summarize and say, of our research, about 6% of agencies have budget-based tiered rates. It's usually used by agencies with large lots, or irrigation is important to customers. I would argue that it sends more of an efficiency signal than a true conservation signal, and just know that it would take a long time, and that's why staff is saying not for this rate study, but if there is interest, it could be on the docket for a future rate study. I think that's it.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate you kind of streamlining that a bit. Board Member Hinsey.
Thank you. Sounds like you don't like the last version, and I think I'm convinced that we shouldn't go there. But I did want to ask, some of the problems that I see with some of these tiers is that we're making a lot of assumptions. And I think in Encinitas, one of the trends that we find most painful is that the folks who have lived here the longest sometimes are some of our, living on a fixed income, more of our lower income residents. And so in my mind, I was thinking, is there a way that we can tier this out? And it seems like it would be based on the time lived in Encinitas. And it's, I know that that's probably controversial for a lot of reasons, but it didn't seem contemplated in any of these methods. And especially this one that you mentioned, that there's legislation that's being contemplated regarding that size. Some of these lots that are our oldest lots held by our most vulnerable residents has nothing to do with their income. But what we've seen in the last 10 years of Encinitas is that you can't touch any property under $1 million. So it seems to make sense that there would be something built in for folks that are coming later paying more. Or do you know of any agencies that do that, or is there any reason why you wouldn't encourage that?
So as I mentioned, there's this paper out here put out by a firm that investigated, at least for the rest of the country, different ways of charging for water. They looked at things like lot size, house size, and I'm forgetting, but some other things too, to decouple the bill from actual water use. I think that would be tough in California because of Prop 218, where it says your rates need to be based on your costs. And that paper even talks about it, that they actually have a section that basically says it'd be tough to do in California. So I haven't seen it. Will this whole income-based billing gain traction? I don't know, but in California, I think it would be tough to do, and I haven't yet seen it.
Board Member Ehlers.
Yeah, and my half-acre lot would be at the bottom of that, and I don't think I support it either. It doesn't look fair, so, and I would probably benefit from it, but I prefer to put more of my lot in native and not irrigate it most of the year and keep it completely independent. So I think that it does send the wrong signal, in my opinion. The only other comment I have, is it possible to get the PowerPoint? For both the rate study and this, I think there's been a ton of good information, and I'd like to be able to look back at it. So if you can email that to us.
Great, thank you. I'd like to just add, I'm really supportive of efficiency, and I know we've talked about this in other ways. I'm a landscape architect, so I kind of have the burden of understanding all these calculations you were just presenting, because I do that. That's what I need to do. I need to demonstrate those calculations when I do an irrigation design for a park or a landscape. So I do get that. I can't imagine burdening our staff with this level of rigor because I don't see. I see that would be a cost, and I'm not sure we're in the place where we would have enough benefit. But I like the idea of efficiency versus conservation. I mean, I get that. I think some of our efficiency challenges have more, this is just my opinion, but more to do with old systems and old components and old fixtures that are leaking. And so we're really looking at it from the perspective of trying to encourage people to have an irrigation audit, and also we can do the similar kinds of audits in their households to put them in the direction of getting financial support for replacing old inefficient components with new, more efficient ones. I don't know, I like that direction we're going with that, plus with conservation. Hopefully we can tick both the boxes, conservation and efficiency. And I was wondering if at this point we have any more feedback to provide Isam and his team. Now would be the time to offer it. And Isam, I'll ask your opinion. Is there anything that would be helpful to you to hear at this point?
So on the BPRT, which is the budget-based, obviously what I'm hearing is that the direction is not to move forward with that. So I guess I get that response so that we don't really have to go in and start working harder on that and trying to get all the data that is needed. On the budget, we got our marching orders in regards of what needs to be provided to the board, and then we will, once we provide that information, I'm wondering what there will be another workshop, hopefully the next workshop where we come back, we will have a financial plan after we obviously providing you with the information together with the rate increases proposed. And then I didn't hear from any of the directors here that we need to cut off any of the budgeted other than the rate stabilization fund to try to lower that and also provide you the information regarding the details of the capital improvements that we're anticipating over the next 3 years. Did I capture that?
I am going to call on Vice President Kranz.
Thank you. One thing I forgot to ask about is the issue of potable reuse. I know we've got the pipe that goes from San Leo treatment facility out to the reservoir, and there may be some capital costs in order to create the potable reuse water supply that has been discussed in various fora. So are we going to add that if it comes up, or is that in this budget here, whatever we need to do in order to explore the ability to make use of that asset?
Okay. As far as I am aware of, Encinitas is still taking the lead on that together with San Alejo and several other agencies. And if you recall, we actually signed their advocacy letter back in, I forgot, it could be June or May of this year. So we are at very early stages. And this kind of a project will most probably not pick up until we finish the CEQA exemption or environmental document. So it's going to be beyond, at least from my perspective, beyond the 3 years. And it's really very hard to put some monies in there in order to save for that project, because we're anticipating that project was $500 million or something close, about, obviously distributed about the different agencies, 18 of them. So we are at early stages. So, and for a project like that, most probably the only way we can actually build something like that is through grants from, so we're hoping that that will be the case.
Okay, and I hear through San Leo JPA board meetings that is probably the area that grant monies are going to be most prevalent, most plentiful. So let's hope we can take advantage of that, because that's an asset that I think is of good value to our ratepayers. Thank you.
Board Member Hinsey.
Did you need more input from us regarding the rate structures, or you just needed to know that we're not interested in the?
If the board has some kind of a guideline for us to look at what we have so that we can manage within a certain percentage that you think that is acceptable, so that we don't really come in another workshop and find out that we are, let's assume 15% per year. Is there any guideline that you would like to share with us so that we can sharpen our pencils and figure out a way of addressing that?
Well, I'd like my cake and I want to eat it too. So if you're asking the question, I would like to see where our neighboring water departments are. And I would love to, if we were below double digit, I would think that's pretty great. So I'm not sure we can get there based on what you've presented today. The consequences to our capital program and just some of the factors that we have no choice about, and that is the cost of our water due to Lake Hodges issues. So, I probably wouldn't promote cutting drastically, but the information of aiming for below double-digit percentage increase, but also looking at what our sister agencies are charging in this region and look at, or are considering, and maybe they're in the same place we are right now, but a little more information on that. I think it would help us to explain to the public better if we were aligned with our geographically associated other water agencies.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts. Anyone else?
I think looking at how we have deferred capital for so long, and I know that Deputy Mayor Lyons and I served on a subcommittee the last time we did this, and we were really successful in bringing the rates down quite low. And I think that it was during the pandemic, and so we wanted to be sensitive to that. But I do understand if it's impossible to get under double digits, but I don't hate the number 12% as much as 15 seems like a pretty big shock.
All right.
Right.
I think
Thank
we
you.
have done what we need to do. And so, as far as our recommended action, it's review and discuss the long-range financial plan for the district's currently ongoing water cost service study, discuss budget and tiered rates, and we did all that, provide direction to staff, and we've done that. So with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.
What? Yeah, I was actually thinking that we would go beyond.